18 million people watched stunned as Jasmine Crockett shattered a decades-old political taboo in just 19 words. The setting, a live town hall in Phoenix, Arizona, with Donald Trump sitting 10 feet away, red-faced and speechless. The emotion raw, electric, and unforgettable, because she didn't shout, she exposed. So here's the question. What kind of truth makes a former president lose control and a nation lean in? This is a story worth every second of your time. The lights in Phoenix didn't just illuminate the stage, they exposed it. A town hall framed as civil discussion had turned into something else entirely. On one side sat Donald Trump, arms folded, lips pursed. On the other sat Jasmine Crockett, composed in a deep green blazer, her stillness louder than the cameras clicking around her. She wasn't there for spectacle. She was there for something colder, sharper. The moderators read opening questions. Border policy, inflation, Ukraine. Jasmine answered with precision, citing bill numbers, economic data, international precedent. Trump tossed slogans like grenades. We had the strongest borders, he boasted. I would have ended Ukraine in a phone call. The crowd laughed. Jasmine didn't. A teacher in the audience rose, breaking format. How can you talk about respect for America, she asked Trump, when you disrespect women in Congress? The air shifted. Jasmine leaned in, not for drama, but direction. When we ask questions, we're called aggressive, she said. When we speak facts, we're called emotional. But when a man yells, that's called leadership. Trump smirked, baiting. You've got more cameras on you than a Hollywood actress. Jasmine paused. Her eyes didn't blink. Her voice didn't rise. You want to talk about roles, she said softly? Let's talk about the role of a father or someone pretending to be one. The room froze. Producers panicked. Moderators stiffened. But it was too late. The clip had already hit TikTok before the next question was asked. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't move. She just watched as the balance of power tilted without warning. And in that sudden silence, one question burned across every screen in America. What happens when the quietest person at the table stops asking for permission and starts asking the wrong man the right question? Jasmine moved through the early questions like a blade, measured, deliberate, unshaken. On border policy, she named the clauses of House Bill 2143. On inflation, she traced rising costs back to corporate markups. On Ukraine, she invoked international law with precision. No emotion, just truth. Trump grinned through it all, tossing out punchlines to distract from her data. Inflation started when Democrats got in their feelings, he joked. The audience chuckled. Jasmine didn't. Then it came a voice from the back row, a retired teacher rising without waiting. Mr. Trump, how can you preach respect for America when you openly disrespect women in Congress? For a moment, even Trump paused. Nobody respects women more than me, he snapped. Look at the numbers. But Jasmine turned calm as steel. You're not alone in asking that, she said to the teacher, then faced the crowd. When women speak facts, we're called angry. When we demand accountability, we're told to calm down. But when a man interrupts, it's called strong leadership. Trump leaned back, clearly irritated. Don't play the victim, he muttered. You're on every screen in America. Jasmine didn't flinch, and yet somehow she replied, I still get interrupted before I finish a sentence. No one clapped. No one moved. The moderators sat stiff, hands frozen over cue cards. What started as a policy forum had cracked open into something more dangerous. Truth not just spoken, but embodied. The question now wasn't about civility or partisanship. It was about the double standards no one wanted to admit until Jasmine made them impossible to ignore. And beneath it all, one quiet question echoed louder than the rest. Why does truth only become aggression when a woman dares to say it aloud? The moment Jasmine said it, let's talk about the role of a father or someone pretending to be one. The room collapsed into silence. It wasn't just shock, it was paralysis. Every camera lens tightened. Moderators froze. Even Trump, always ready with a comeback, sat stunned. Then came the eruption. That's a damn lie, he barked, face flushed, fists clenched. You don't talk about my family. He stood half lunging toward the mic, eyes wide with fury. But Jasmine stayed seated, steady. Her voice didn't waver. If asking questions rattles the powerful, she said, maybe the foundation wasn't that strong to begin with. Behind the scenes, producers scrambled. One mouth cut to feed another. check legal counsel. But it was too late. The clip had already gone viral. Twitter exploded. TikTok looped her line with slow-motion edits and thunderous applause tracks. Hashtags bloomed, hashtag pretend father, hashtag Crockett, unfiltered, hashtag truth hit back. Trump, red-faced, demanded an apology. None came. He sat back shaken, unable to spin or reframe. The usual tactics, deflect, insult, dominate, failed him. And Jasmine didn't gloat. She simply let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. She didn't need to say another word. Her presence had done what sound bites never could. It shifted the air. The audience didn't erupt. They absorbed. And in that absorption, something irreversible happened. Control flipped. Jasmine had said a single line, not as an attack, but as a mirror. And in that mirror, the most powerful man in the room didn't see strength. He saw exposure. So the question no one dared to speak, but everyone felt lingering. Had she just made a rhetorical point? Or had she pulled the thread on a secret too dangerous to say out loud? The moment Jasmine Crockett said the words, someone pretending to be one, the internet caught fire before the cameras stopped rolling. Within 90 seconds, the first clips hit TikTok. Within 10 minutes, the hashtags were trending globally. Hashtag pretend father. Hashtag Crockett was ready. Hashtag green blazer truth. By the time the town hall ended, nearly 4.2 million people had seen the moment, not with commentary, not with spin, but raw, unedited. A single sentence that cracked open something America hadn't prepared to face. YouTube compilations popped up like wildfire. Top 5 times Trump got silenced. The look on his face when she said it. Twitter threads broke down body language. TikTokers slowed the footage to study Trump's blink rate. Every platform was a battlefield, and Jasmine had walked off the stage without a single scratch. While Trump's surrogates scrambled to reframe the narrative, her team didn't tweet a word. They didn't need to. The moment had gone nuclear. The audience became her voice. The silence became the amplifier. Inside, the West Wing chaos unfolded like a prison riot. Phones ringing off the hook, staffers pacing, aides shouting over each other. Trump stormed into a private office tie, loosened red blotches on his neck, and slammed the door so hard a framed flag fell off the wall. "Who the hell let that woman on the stage with me?" he bellowed. "Who cleared this?" No one answered. No one could. Because no one expected Jasmine to detonate the room without even raising her volume. She hadn't made a scene. She made history. The comms team tried damage control. One aide suggested calling it a personal attack. Another drafted a talking point claiming Jasmine fabricated the line for clout. But it was too late. Late-night shows were already booking segments. CNN cut from Ukraine coverage to a full panel about what her words might really mean. MSNBC aired a 10-minute analysis of Trump's face at the exact moment the question landed. Even Fox News couldn't ignore it, though they tried spinning it as a classless jab. But their own viewers noticed something else, the fear behind his eyes. Jasmine sat in a quiet hotel room in Phoenix away from the noise, sipping mint tea out of a ceramic cup. Her phone lit up every second. Texts from friends, emails from state reps, screenshots of donation spikes. Her campaign manager's voice came through on speaker. "We just cleared our entire fourth quarter goal in 3 hours." Jasmine didn't smile. Not yet. She just stared at the TV screen, replaying her face, composed, steady, as if watching someone else. She wasn't celebrating. She was watching the aftershocks roll in. A young woman on TikTok had stitched the clip with footage of her estranged father saying, "This one sentence made me cry. She said what I couldn't." Veterans tweeted out support. "This woman has a spine most men I served with didn't." Teachers quoted her in classrooms. Even a former GOP senator retweeted the clip, writing, "Sometimes truth doesn't scream, it just lands." Her team offered to draft a follow-up statement. Jasmine said no. "Let them talk," she said quietly. "I already did." Because in less than 24 hours, Jasmine Crockett had done what few thought possible, not just rattle a former president, but force the entire country to ask itself if the myth it worshipped was ever real at all. And behind the millions of views and headlines, a deeper current pulsed forward like a rising tide. Was this just a viral moment or the beginning of a political reckoning too big to contain? The clip wasn't just viral, it was radioactive. and by sunrise it had melted through the steel armor of Trump's inner circle. At 5:17 a.m., Trump's voice exploded through a secure line inside a Mar-a-Lago war room. Find something. Anything. I want her buried by noon. His team, groggy and rattled, snapped into muscle memory. This wasn't politics anymore. This was retaliation. The old machinery of suppression kicked back to life. Blacklists were pulled. Opposition files dusted off. The smell of panic filled the air, masked by the arrogance of men who had silenced louder voices with far less. 3 calls were made within the first hour. The first to a retired private investigator in Arlington with a long track record of cleaning up uncomfortable narratives. The second to a tabloid editor in New York who had buried more than one scandal beneath flashy headlines and paywalls. And the third to a man known only in political circles as the Fixer, a former intelligence liaison turned political saboteur. He didn't ask why. He just said, "Give me 6 hours." Trump paced the room like a trapped animal, red tie thrown over his shoulder, eyes locked on the television, playing Jasmine's moment on loop. "She didn't even flinch," he muttered. "She said it like she rehearsed it in front of a mirror for a year." One of his aides offered a pre-drafted tweet. "Sad to see how low our politics has gotten. Vicious attacks from low IQ radicals." Trump read it, sneered, and threw it back. "That's not enough. I don't want a tweet. I want blood." By 8:43 a.m., the first leak hit a fringe blog in Florida. Unverified whispers suggest Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett once settled a defamation case in college over a paternity claim. A lie. But they didn't care. It was never about truth. It was about chaos, distraction, flooding the public square with noise until no one could tell what mattered. The Fixer made his move. A cryptic post appeared on an encrypted forum known for laundering reputations and destroying them. It mentioned an old Eastern European clinic, a late-night private jet charter, Melania, a lab technician under NDA. The words selective denial and genetic editing whispered through channels no journalist could publicly quote, but every newsroom suddenly scrambled to investigate. And at the heart of it all, unspoken but intentional, was one implication: Jasmine Crockett had pulled on a thread that led somewhere very real and very dangerous. Trump's camp leaked another memo, this one, to social media influencers: attack her tone, question her education, mock her wardrobe, her hair, her accent. Make her look unstable, the subject line read. Make her look small, but none of it stuck. Because Jasmine hadn't shouted. She hadn't played dirty. She'd simply asked a question, and the man who once ruled the headlines with insults and fear couldn't handle it. Still, the machine kept grinding. By noon, op-eds began to appear questioning Jasmine's professionalism. Anonymous sources hinted she was difficult behind the scenes. One TV anchor called her moment reckless. But in private, everyone knew what they were witnessing. This wasn't backlash. It was fear. The kind that makes powerful men reach for the old playbook and realize it's not working anymore. And as the narrative spun, as the whispers darkened, and as the smear campaign picked up speed like a storm, desperate to cover its own tracks, a deeper dread began to rise in the very camp that launched it. What if the woman they tried to silence had just opened a door no one could close? While headlines spiraled into chaos and pundits shouted across split screens, Jasmine Crockett did the one thing no one expected. She said nothing. No retaliation, no press tour, no fiery tweets. While Trump's camp threw everything at her, insults, conspiracy threads, doctored screenshots, she sat still, silent, steady. And in that stillness, something unprecedented happened. The smear campaign began to suffocate on its own noise. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy, discipline, forged from years of courtrooms where the loudest lawyer didn't always win, but the most prepared one never lost. Donors kept flooding in. Teachers quoted her in classrooms. A viral tweet read, "If this is what unbothered looks like, give her the gavel already." In the digital inferno of smear, Jasmine's refusal to engage became the story. She didn't swing back. She stood taller. 3 days after the town hall, she reemerged not in D.C., not on a Sunday show, but at the South Dallas Cultural Center, where her journey had quietly begun years before. The room wasn't packed with press or consultants, but with students, single mothers, church elders, local organizers. No velvet ropes, no teleprompter. Just a wooden podium and a wall behind her that read in bold paint, "Our voices matter." She stepped to the mic in a dark maroon suit, natural hair tied back, no entourage in sight. Her eyes scanned the room not for applause but for grounding. Then she spoke and her voice was soft measured. "If a question can shake the White House," she said, "maybe it was never that strong to begin with." A beat. The room didn't erupt, it absorbed. No slogans, no spectacle. Just truth dropped like a stone in still water. And the ripple traveled far. Cable anchors scrambled to respond. Some mocked her as evasive. Others called it political judo. But behind the camera lights, the shift was already happening. Polls spiked. Her name appeared in focus groups. Parents printed her quote and taped it to kitchen fridges. A student in Atlanta wrote it on her backpack in permanent marker. That evening, standing beside a mural of Maya Angelou and Fannie Lou Hamer, Jasmine answered no questions. She gave no sound bites. She simply stood there as if reminding America that storms don't always require thunder. Sometimes the loudest clap is when a woman refuses to be broken by the wind. Meanwhile, in Washington, Trump's team kept pushing. More whispers, more late-night leaks. But none of it seemed to land. The public mood had changed. Every new attack felt more desperate, more out of touch. Like watching someone scream underwater, their voice muffled by their own panic. And still Jasmine said nothing. No denials, no outrage. Just work, just presence. In a world that expected scandal to be met with fire, Jasmine brought water. In a system that thrived on chaos, she brought form. And somewhere in the silence between smear and response, a new kind of power began to crystallize, not built on spectacle, but on self-control. People didn't just admire her, they started to model her. Dignity became contagious. And as the spotlight intensified, the threats grew louder, and the pressure mounted to fight back. Jasmine Crockett simply looked at America with the calm of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Because maybe, just maybe, the most radical act in modern politics isn't speaking louder. It's refusing to speak when they expect you to scream. And so the question lingers, can sheer integrity silence a machine built on destruction? They couldn't crack her composure, so they came for her face. They couldn't counter her facts, so they came for her tone. By the end of the week, the smear campaign had mutated from desperation into something darker, something surgical. A wave of pixelated hate spread across the internet, not about Jasmine's question, not about the political firestorm she ignited, but about her earrings, her lips, the cadence of her voice. One influencer posted a slowed-down clip of her, speaking, overlaying it with a cartoon laugh track. Another zoomed in on an old college party photo, blurry, harmless, irrelevant. But context never mattered. The goal wasn't truth. The goal was erosion. A leaked memo from a conservative digital past confirmed what Jasmine's team already suspected. The subject line was brutal in its clarity, discredit without elevating. The bullets were worse. Mock her voice, preachy, over-rehearsed. Attack her style, too polished, fake relatable. Target race-coded language, angry, emotional, unstable. They didn't want to debate her ideas. They wanted to reduce her to noise. Jasmine's staff watched the storm roll in from every angle. The intern on social media duty logged 3,700 hate comments in 1 hour. Her eyelashes are louder than her arguments. Who let the substitute teacher on stage green blazer or green screen? She's fake either way. The cruelty wasn't clever, it was coordinated. And it cut not because it was true, but because it tried to replace what was. In private group chats, Jasmine's allies vented fury. One aide slammed her laptop shut after seeing an edited video titled "Meltdown Crockett," a deep-fake splicing Jasmine's steady voice with erratic outbursts. They can't win on facts, she hissed. So they manufacture fiction. But Jasmine, as always, was still. Not unfeeling, just unmoved. They're shouting at a mirror, she said quietly, trying to crack me with their own reflection. Still, the weight bore down. Every smear brought risk. Every lie buried 5 truths. On cable news panels, debated her temperament. On podcasts, men who had never stepped foot in a courtroom dissected her facial expressions like a science experiment. Even allies hesitated. One DNC donor asked her campaign if Jasmine might consider toning it down next time. as if truth had a volume knob. And yet, amid the digital fog, the public started to feel the disconnect. Voters weren't blind. They saw the shift from outrage to obsession. The more the attacks zeroed in on Jasmine's voice, the more people listened to what she was saying. The more they ridiculed her appearance, the more dignity they saw in her restraint. The smear machine had overplayed its hand. It had turned a moment into a movement. A high school teacher in Detroit played the town hall clip next to the online hate montage. "Which one looks afraid?" she asked her class. A teenager answered the loud one. Jasmine's campaign chair stared at the numbers, record fundraising, new volunteers, from swing states, a 28% jump in independent support. The data didn't lie. People weren't just defending her, they were seeing through the performance. Truth didn't need makeup. Dignity didn't need rebranding. And real power, wasn't about who shouted loudest, but who stood tallest when the noise tried to drown them. The strategy had backfired. The smear had turned into a mirror. And so the nation stared into its own reflection and asked, if this is what we attack in a leader, what does that say about what we're protecting? Outbursts. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't clap back. She didn't threaten lawsuit. The noise roared louder by the hour, mockery splice clips AI forged. She didn't schedule a redemption interview or go live on Instagram in tears. She reached instead for her phone, typed 13 words, and let them speak for themselves. When they come for your character, it's because they've got nothing to say about your record. No hashtags, no emojis, no call to arms, just a scalpel of clarity. The tweet detonated quietly. Screenshots flooded news feeds, pinned to profiles, printed on posters. A law professor called it a masterclass in rhetorical jujitsu. An op-ed in The Atlantic described it as the moment Crockett ascended from politician to principal. But Jasmine wasn't reading the coverage. She was in Houston, standing beside nurses in a budget meeting on maternal health access. She didn't mention the smear. She talked about prenatal care desserts in rural Texas. She visited a community college in El Paso to discuss trade certification grants. The headlines kept shouting her name, but she walked past them, deeper into the lives that had first elected her. The invitations came anyway. Cable news anchors begging for a sit-down, podcast hosts promising viral reach. One network offering primetime space to clear the air. Jasmine declined them all. "I'm not here to fight ghosts," she told her comms team. "I'm here to work." Her refusal only fed the legend. In a world addicted to spectacle, her absence became its own kind of presence. While opponents screamed louder, Jasmine stepped back, and in doing so rose above the battlefield entirely. In a barbershop in Atlanta, men passed her quote around like scripture. In classrooms in Oakland, students dissected it line by line. Even on Fox News, a rare moment of begrudging respect slipped through. "You may not like her politics," one host admitted, "but that woman doesn't blink." And that was the point. She wasn't trying to outshout her critics. She was reminding America what leadership looked like before it was filtered through memes, flame wars, and partisan clickbait. Inside her campaign office, staffers watched the analytics pour in. Her approval ratings climbed in suburbs among independents, even among disillusioned centrists. But Jasmine waved off the numbers. "They'll crash again," she said. "Let's fix the bus routes in Oak Cliff first." Her clarity wasn't for show. It was muscle memory from courtrooms where she'd learned the power of restraint. Every word mattered. Every silence mattered more. That restraint infected her supporters. Online, her base shifted from defense to direction. They quoted her in meetings, invoked her calm in protests. What would Jasmine do became less of a slogan and more of a strategy. Even her opponents began shifting their tone, because you can't win a screaming match with someone who won't raise their voice. Meanwhile, the smear machine sputtered. Without her engagement, the attacks felt like fists thrown into fog. Each new clip, each doctored image, each snide comment only magnified the contrast. They looked smaller, she looked steadier, and something rare began to take root: admiration, not just from allies, but from those who simply wanted to believe politics could be more than noise. Jasmine didn't retreat. She rose not by crushing others, but by standing taller than their tactics. And the world took notice. So now the question shifted, not about her composure, but about the future. In a political era addicted to chaos, what happens when dignity becomes more contagious than outrage? The smoke from the smear campaign hadn't cleared, but something unexpected began moving through it. Not defiance, not resistance, Recognition. Jasmine hadn't played the game, hadn't shouted back, hadn't performed for applause. And yet her silence, her restraint, her refusal to claw for airtime began to stir something older than politics, something deeper than partisanship. People who once rolled their eyes at Congress drama now sat forward, not because they agreed with her, but because they saw something in her they hadn't seen in years: control without chaos, strength without spectacle. In suburban kitchens from Scottsdale to Charlotte, moms stirred coffee and watched the clip again. Not the scandal, but the stillness. One mother of three, a lifelong independent who'd voted for Romney, and then Biden, turned to her husband and whispered, "Why did that rattle him so badly? What did he see in her that scared him?" At a retirement community in Pennsylvania, a retired Air Force pilot replayed her town hall moment and muttered, "That wasn't a jab. That was a mirror." Across dinner tables, offices, message boards, the same questions echoed, not about the scandal, but about the reaction. Not about what Jasmine said, but how calmly she said it. Then came the moment no one saw coming. A state senator from Iowa, Republican, ex-cattle rancher, red district lifer, was asked on a local AM radio show whether he thought Jasmine had crossed a line. He paused, cleared his throat, and said, "If my daughter ever spoke like that, calm and clear, to the most powerful man in the country, I'd be proud. That's what this country needs more of, not less." The audio went viral in under an hour. The man's office phone rang off the hook. He didn't retract a word. Even Fox News, scrambling for its usual spin, began to fracture. One host called her dangerous. Another interrupted. But she didn't lie. She didn't shout. And she didn't back down. "What exactly are we mad about?" viewers online answered before producers could cut to commercial. "We're not mad. We're intrigued." In the halls of her office, Jasmine walked past interns who suddenly stood taller. Not just inspired, but awakened. Something in her silence had touched the parts of the public tired of rage, tired of insult wars dressed up as debate. She'd taken on a titan with no fists, no flash, just the unbearable sharpness of dignity. And now that sharpness was cutting across aisles, through age lines, beyond districts. A letter arrived, handwritten, folded into a plain white envelope. No return address. Inside the words, "I'm a Republican. I've voted red since '88, but I showed my daughter your clip. She asked if we could write to you. So here we are. Thank you for not yelling." Jasmine held the letter like a fragile truth, not heavy but holy, and as the machinery of politics tried to recalibrate around her offering op-eds, think pieces, and new smear angles, the public kept leaning closer. Not to defend her, but to understand what she had become. Because somewhere between the insult and the silence, Jasmine Crockett had stopped being a headline and started becoming a mirror for every person who'd ever been told to sit down, smile, or soften. And now, as her voice traveled through unlikely mouths and across once closed doors, a quiet transformation stirred across the country. Was she still just a congresswoman, or had she become the symbol of something they couldn't smear, silence, or stop? The first headline dropped at dawn, tucked into the corner of a major outlet's homepage. "Crockett's quiet strength draws praise from civil rights icon." It spread slower than a scandal, but deeper than one. By midday, it was everywhere. The quote came from Vernon Jacobs, a man who'd marched with King, who'd been jailed in Selma, who hadn't endorsed a politician in nearly 15 years. And yet there he was, at the base of a mural in Montgomery hat, in hand voice unwavering. In the 60s, he said we had to scream just to be seen. But Jasmine Crockett, she stood in silence and made the whole damn country listen. That's not a moment. That's a movement. The weight of his words sent a tremor through the airwaves. Anchors dropped their smirks. Editors reassessed their angles. Suddenly, Jasmine wasn't the firebrand. She was the heir, the continuation of a lineage forged in sweatstone and broken bones on southern roads. Within hours, her campaign site was crashing under the volume of donations. $5 here, 10 there. Thousands of micro acts of faith from people who saw in her something they hadn't dared hope for in years. Someone unbought, unshaken, and unwilling to play the game by rules designed to break her. In a community center in Birmingham, a retired teacher played Vernon's clip on a loop, pausing only to wipe her eyes. "We don't need another performer," she whispered. We need someone who knows when to speak and when to let silence shame the powerful. Across the country, churches held prayer circles, not for Jasmine's protection, but for her purpose, for the ground she was walking on, because it had become holy. The shift in media tone was unmistakable. The same publications that once dismissed her as confrontational now praised her judicial grace. Long-form pieces emerged comparing her demeanor to Thurgood Marshall, her language to Barbara Jordan. One even dared say Jasmine Crockett is what happens when legacy meets readiness. But Jasmine didn't bask in it. She didn't gloat. In fact, she barely changed her rhythm. When her comms director read her, the Jacobs quote, Jasmine simply nodded once and said, "Then I better make sure I'm worth that blessing." Behind the scenes, even political opponents began to hedge. A centrist senator who'd quietly opposed her bills sent a private message, "Disagree with you often, but damn, you handled that with grace." Respect. A conservative strategist caught on a hot mic during a break in a panel muttered, "If she runs in a decade, we're in trouble." Meanwhile, her team, young, multiracial, underfunded, sat in stunned silence as the donation dashboards lit up like a Vegas strip. By evening, they'd raised more in 24 hours than the past 3 months combined. But it wasn't just about money, it was momentum. It was the kind of surge you can't fake. The kind that doesn't just signal support, it signals belief. Jasmine stood in her office long after midnight, staring out at the city skyline. Her phone buzzed with congratulations, press requests, invitations to headline events. She ignored them all. Her hand rested on her chest, not in pride, but in pressure. Because now it wasn't just her voice on the line. It was every young girl watching, every voter betrayed, every elder who saw in her the fight they thought had faded. And so the question turned soft but urgent, carried by the wind now lifting her name across the nation. Can one woman still carry the weight of a generation's unfinished dream without ever raising her voice? For days the media had speculated. Was it a calculated jab, a rehearsed strike, or just a one-off line that happened to land like a hammer on national television? But inside the former president's inner circle, behind closed doors and beneath layers of spin, the truth was unraveling, and it had nothing to do with policy. The chaos wasn't about what Jasmine said. It was about what they feared she knew. The whistleblower didn't come forward with a name, just a shadow and a story. He didn't contact the press. First, he reached out to a mid-level producer at a local Phoenix affiliate, someone who wasn't syndicated, someone who'd once covered migrant shelters and teacher strikes, someone who could still listen. His message was short-typed at 3:04 a.m. The meltdown wasn't political, it was personal. That line about pretending to be a father, it hit something real. The room went cold. You need to look closer. The story trickled, then surged. Within 24 hours, it reached a national journalist with a reputation for sniffing out buried truths. The sources began to align. One described a meeting the morning after the town hall, Trump shouting, red-faced, slamming a folder against the table. "She knows something," he said. That wasn't luck. That was a damn signal. Staffers exchanged panicked glances. Phones were seized. Old staff were revetted. Someone mentioned a sealed court document from years past. Another mentioned an NDA signed under pressure involving a clinic in Switzerland. The internet did what it does best: connect dots, true or not. But then something stranger happened. A single Instagram story posted for 24 hours and then gone. The account belonged to Elena Dragovich, former model, close friend of Melania, rarely public, never political. No caption, just a blurred black and white photo of a woman standing in front of a mirror, holding her stomach, eyes closed. At the bottom, 3 words, "Some truths weigh more." The image detonated like a whisper inside a cathedral. Screenshots circulated. Speculation exploded. Was it metaphor? Was it history? Was it warning? Dragovich didn't clarify. She vanished offline. No interviews, no denials, just silence. But silence now had meaning, because the same machine that once dictated truth was now unraveling under its own paranoia. Trump's advisors doubled down on control. More deflections, more smear scripts. But the urgency smelled different now. It wasn't about winning a news cycle. It was about plugging a hole in a ship that was leaking from somewhere deep, somewhere old. The fear wasn't public shame. It was exposure. That Jasmine's line, someone pretending to be one, hadn't been metaphorical, that it had been deliberate, surgical, targeted. Inside Jasmine's campaign office, no one celebrated. They monitored, listened, but made no move. When asked if they would comment on the swirling theories, her press secretary said only, "She asked a question. That's not a crime." And that was the brilliance of it. Jasmine hadn't accused. She hadn't named. She'd let the truth shake the ground beneath them without ever lifting a shovel. Across the country, curiosity festered not in outrage but in wonder. What had been said in confidence behind the golden doors of power? What secrets had been traded to preserve image dynasty myth? And how could a single sentence spoken calmly without rage or threat pierce the armor of a man who once believed himself untouchable? Now the question didn't belong to her. It belonged to us. What if the truth she never confirmed is the one they can no longer bury? The room was quiet, but the tension inside Jasmine's campaign office pulsed like a second heartbeat. Phones buzzed, screens blinked, polls surged. But no one was celebrating. Because beneath the headlines and whispers, a decision waited, one that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the kind of leader Jasmine wanted to be. The rumors were spreading like wildfire. And now for the first time, the question wasn't about what she knew. It was whether she'd say it. Her chief of staff paced the floor, voice low but urgent. "We don't need to make the claim, we just need to confirm the right detail. One line and it's game over." Another aide argued the opposite. "If we even touch this, we become them. We cross a line we can't uncross." Jasmine sat in the center, unmoving, her hands folded tightly, not in prayer, but in pressure. The same kind she felt in courtrooms, moments before delivering final arguments, the kind that decided whether a person walked free or was buried beneath silence forever. They laid out the options on the table like weapons: a name from the clinic, a second-hand flight manifest, the cryptic Instagram post now seen by millions. Enough smoke to suggest fire, but not enough to prove the burn. Even hinting at it would destroy him, one strategist whispered. Jasmine didn't look up. And what would it do to us? The question hung in the air like ash. Outside, protesters began showing up, not to demand her silence or action, but to hold signs that said things like, "Truth needs no permission," and she already spoke. Across the country, journalists debated whether she was shielding something bigger. Was her restraint noble or manipulative? Was her silence strategy or complicity? But inside her own mind, the battle was personal. She wasn't just weighing risk. She was measuring pain. The pain of being defamed while holding your ground. The pain of knowing you had a match that could burn a dynasty down and choosing to keep it in your pocket. Some nights she replayed the town hall moment in her head, not because she doubted it, but because the fallout had revealed more rot than she expected. Not just from her enemies, but from those who now praised her for what they wanted her to become. Was she being used as a vessel for a fight she didn't start? Or was she the one holding the sword? Jasmine walked into the side hallway and stared at her reflection in the office window. The city outside flickered in orange and blue. She could see her team behind her, in the glass, anxious, loyal, fractured. She whispered under her breath, "Truth isn't always what you say. Sometimes it's what you refuse to say." When she returned to the room, she gave no speech, just one sentence. "We stay the course. No leaks, no nods, no escalation, just calm, knowing eyes." Because maybe she thought integrity isn't the absence of fire. It's choosing not to burn the world when you know exactly how. But the choice left her with a deeper, quieter question, still clawing inside her chest. In a world built on exposure, can silence still be the loudest form of truth? The pressure didn't come all at once. It built like a tide, slow and deliberate, until it was lapping at her doorstep with the weight of a nation's demand. Morning shows debated her silence with surgical obsession. "Is it bravery or manipulation?" one anchor asked. "If she knows something, why not say it?" another countered. Cable panels split down the middle. Half praised her restraint as statesmanship, the other called it political theater. By noon, hashtag Say It Jasmine trended beside hashtag Protect Crockett. The contradiction was deafening. In Washington, the air tightened with every non-answer. Reporters chased her down hallways, lights flashing, mics thrust forward. "Do you stand by your words, Congresswoman? Are you confirming the rumors or denying them?" She kept walking, chin high, lips sealed. Her silence wasn't dismissive, it was loaded, like a grenade without a pin held calmly in her palm. The more she refused to clarify, the more the world leaned in. That was the paradox. They claimed to hate ambiguity, but they fed on it like oxygen. Her supporters, once content with her composure, began to crack at the seams. Letters flooded in. "We love your grace, but we need your voice. Don't let them twist the silence into guilt." Even within her campaign, tensions flared. One advisor slammed his fist on the conference table. "We're letting them define this. Every second we wait, we bleed." Another staffer replied quietly. "Or we build. And not just for now, but for what comes next." Jasmine listened but said little, not because she had nothing to say, but because she knew every word from this point forward would echo louder than intended. One wrong phrase could ignite the very war she'd worked so carefully to avoid. And yet the burden was heavy. She wasn't just carrying her reputation. Now she was carrying the fear, the hope, the projection of millions who needed her to be something more than mortal. Every breath she didn't take became a headline, her inbox filled with questions from voters. A single mother in Nevada. "I'm teaching my daughter to speak up. Am I wrong?" A teacher in Michigan. "I tell my students truth matters. What do I tell them now?" Each question tore at her like paper cuts, small but bleeding just the same. And still she waited. Meanwhile, her critics sharpened their blades. One pundit accused her of weaponizing implication. A congressman tweeted, "If she has proof, show it. If not, this is slander wrapped in dignity." It wasn't just pushback, it was escalation. The old guard, the machinery she'd rattled, wanted her boxed, labeled, neutralized. And if she wouldn't implode on camera, they would try to crush her with questions instead. She stood at the edge of a press scrum one morning, eyes calm, flanked by staff who looked more nervous than she did. One journalist shouted, "Do you deny the implication you made at the town hall?" Jasmine paused, breathed in. The crowd tensed. For a moment it felt like she might finally answer, but all she said was this: "Sometimes the loudest lies are the ones we're told not to ask about." The silence that followed wasn't confusion, it was awe. Because she hadn't confirmed. She hadn't denied. She'd reframed the battlefield again. With one line, she made them question the very rules they'd built to trap her. Back in her office alone for a moment, Jasmine stared at the blurred city beyond the window. The pressure hadn't broken her, but it had bent something inside her, something that now hummed like electricity beneath her skin. And so the world watched, breath held, waiting for her next move. Would she hold the line, or cross into the storm to finally speak what everyone else feared to hear? The room was packed beyond fire code. Journalists, shoulder-to-shoulder, cords tangled like vines across the floor. Dozens of microphones pointed at a single podium, bathed in sterile light. Behind the curtains, aides whispered final instructions, some pleading, others praying. Outside, the crowd stretched for blocks, supporters holding up signs that read, "Say it, Jasmine, and truth needs no filter." The pressure in the air wasn't just media anticipation. It was expectation sharpened to a knife's edge. Everyone was waiting for the explosion. Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the stage, not like a woman ready to burn it down, but like a woman prepared to carry weight. She wore no war paint, no power colors, just a muted navy suit and the stillness of someone who had already made her choice. The cameras snapped in rapid succession, a staccato heartbeat of flash and focus. She looked out over the sea of faces, some hostile, some desperate, some just hungry, and paused. The room fell into a breathless quiet. "You've waited patiently," she began, her voice clear, steady, not loud but impossible to ignore. "You've speculated, you've demanded, you've assumed." A beat. She inhaled. "So let me speak clearly." The room leaned forward, cameras zoomed, pens froze midair. "I respect truth," she said, "even when it's inconvenient. Especially then." A pause heavier than before. "But I will not speak on things I do not know. I have no personal knowledge of Melania Trump's marriage." That line, she let it hang, was not about their paperwork. It was about the performance of power. The silence cracked like thunder. No one moved, no one cheered. It was the kind of answer that emptied the lungs of the room, not because it detonated anything, but because it didn't. No bombshell, no smoking gun, no revelation, but something deeper. A refusal that felt like a revelation anyway. A veteran reporter blinked slowly, whispering to his neighbor. That was restraint weaponized. A younger journalist clutched her chest as if something had been unhooked inside her. On Twitter, confusion lit up first. That's it. She backed down, but seconds later a different tone emerged. She didn't flinch. She didn't sell out. She walked in unarmed and still controlled the room. Backstage, her team was split. One aide whispered, "We missed our chance." Another, eyes wide with awe, whispered back, "No, we just redefined the battlefield." On live TV, commentators scrambled to spin it. Some mocked her for dodging. Others marveled at the elegance of her language. But viewers weren't listening to them anymore. They were watching the clip over and over and hearing what wasn't said just as clearly as what was. She hadn't exonerated. She hadn't accused. She had framed silence as a scalpel and let the audience realize they were already bleeding. Jasmine left the podium without taking questions. No smug smile, no victory pose. Just calm resolve, as if she closed a door and dared the world to open it again. Outside, some cheered, some shouted, some simply stood in the stunned stillness. But no one walked away unchanged. Later that night, as the clip played on loop and op-eds drafted themselves in real time, a single tweet captured the moment perfectly. She didn't light the match, but she just watched them burn anyway. And so once again, the question wasn't what she said, but what she made impossible to ignore. Can a refusal, if delivered with perfect clarity, be more powerful than the revelation the world demands? The press conference was over, but the real storm was only beginning. Not from the media, they were still catching their breath, but from the public. On every platform, in every group chat, around every dinner table, the debate ignited like dry grass under lightning. Some called her moment a masterstroke. Others called it a missed opportunity. Why didn't she go further? Why drop the mic without dropping the truth? The country wasn't asking for spectacle. They were starving for confirmation. And Jasmine had denied them that meal. Or so they thought. Comment threads exploded. Influencers posted side-by-side clips of Jasmine and past whistleblowers asking if silence could be the new signature of resistance. A prominent activist tweeted, "That wasn't avoidance. That was control. And control scares the hell out of power." But others fired back. She had them on the ropes. Why pull the punch, all that build-up for a poem? Even among her followers, the unity fractured into something more raw, something closer to truth. In the eye of this digital storm, Jasmine sat alone in her home office. The room was dim-lit only by a desk lamp and the glow of her laptop screen. She scrolled through messages, thousands of them. Praise, disappointment, fury, reverence. One stood out: "I used to think silence meant surrender. Now I'm wondering if it's the last honest thing left." Her phone buzzed with another text, this one from her father. "You spoke like your mother would have. Careful, thoughtful, sharp without drawing blood." She stared at the message longer than expected. The old grief stirred in her chest, not painful but anchoring. She remembered what her mother once told her before a courtroom appearance. "Let the facts do the cutting. You hold the blade." That memory echoed in her next move. Jasmine opened her phone and posted a single quote. "Sometimes silence echoes louder than accusation. No context, no thread. Just the kind of sentence that landed in your chest and stayed there. It didn't trend instantly. It didn't scream. It hummed, a quiet ripple through the noise. People began sharing it in unexpected places, across protest signs, in school slideshows, on office whiteboards. A speech coach in Chicago printed it above his classroom door. A trauma counselor in Portland read it aloud to a group of survivors. A reverend in Baltimore ended her sermon with it. The quote didn't answer the question, it deepened it. Meanwhile, the smear machines sputtered, confused by the lack of fuel. They wanted a scandal. She gave them a mirror. And when power looks into a mirror and sees restraint instead of rage, it panics because it has no idea how to control what it can't provoke. Back on the news, talking heads twisted themselves trying to define her. Is she the face of a new political strategy? Is silence just another brand? But in living rooms and libraries and barbershops, the conversation shifted. It wasn't about Jasmine anymore. It was about what we ask from women in power, what we expect from Black leadership, what we consider strength. A student in Philadelphia wrote in her journal, "She didn't say what we wanted. but she showed what we forgot we needed. And in that moment, something remarkable happened, not viral, not explosive, but real. A connection deeper than a headline. A recognition not just of one woman's restraint, but of a shared hunger for something beyond spectacle. Because maybe, just maybe, in a world screaming for scandal, silence isn't retreat, it's rebellion. So the question now isn't why she didn't say more. It's this: can quiet defiance still rewrite the rules of power? They clipped her words not to mock, but to remember. Middle school girls in Baltimore wrote silence echoes louder across their notebooks. A teacher in Sacramento played her town hall exchange before a civics lesson, then turned to her class and asked, "What does real leadership sound like?" Across campus lawns and community centers, her quotes were scribbled onto chalkboards, pinned to bulletin boards, whispered between generations. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just being heard, she was being echoed. Podcasts once obsessed with scandal now shifted tone. A leadership series featured her under the title Composure in Chaos. Business blogs dissected her strategy, not her silence, but her emotional discipline. She didn't just hold back. One host said she redefined control as a kind of power. It wasn't about the accusation anymore. It wasn't about Trump. It was about her. Her posture, her pause, her refusal to let the moment turn her into a caricature. And that shift changed the conversation everywhere. A social worker in Detroit printed her press quote, "I respect truth even when it's inconvenient," and handed it out to a group of foster teens during a group circle. This, she said, is what holding your ground looks like. In Chicago, a group of organizers named their next campaign after her words, #louder than accusation. Even in rural Mississippi, a preacher ended his Sunday sermon with Jasmine's final line from the press event. She didn't drag anyone, he said. She rose. Journalists began writing differently. They stopped chasing the next twist and started exploring how a woman under siege from political firestorms held her posture with the kind of grace that made every insult look childish. No spin, no tweet storms, just a quiet center that refused to fracture. Editorials no longer asked if Jasmine Crockett was telling the truth. They asked if this was the model the next generation needed. At her office in Dallas, volunteers tripled. College students from Georgia and Ohio flew in to help with policy research. One intern from Arizona said, "I came here because she reminded me what dignity looks like. I didn't know we still had that." Every speech she gave was sold out within hours, not because people wanted to hear gossip, but because they wanted to hear clarity. A grandmother in Queens mailed Jasmine a photograph of her granddaughter with the message, "She thinks you're a superhero. I tell her you're just someone who stayed calm when the fire got too loud." Jasmine read the note twice. She folded it gently and placed it inside her desk between court briefs and community grants. Not for politics, but for grounding. The conversation had shifted not because of what Jasmine said, but because of what she didn't. In a time when outrage was currency and volume defined visibility, she had taken the risk of restraint, and somehow that restraint had turned into resonance. She didn't just change the mood of the country, she gave it permission to breathe. And so in classrooms, clinics, barbershops, and pulpits, the question wasn't about who Jasmine Crockett exposed anymore. It was about what she represented, not a politician in crisis, but a mirror for how courage sounds when it's spoken without a scream. The attacks didn't stop because they failed, they stopped because they backfired. Every insult, every doctored image, every whisper campaign only sharpened Jasmine's presence. The public didn't recoil, they rallied. What was meant to humiliate her had made her unshakable. What was meant to bury her had built a monument instead. And so her opponents retreated, not with apologies, but with silence. The new directive was simple: starve her of airtime, freeze her out. No more headlines with her name. No more pundits dissecting her calm. Let the spotlight drift elsewhere, back to bills, budgets, and battles they could control. But the silence wasn't clean. Behind closed doors, frustration simmered. In one strategy meeting, a senior advisor muttered, "She's a lightning rod." We spun off her energy and didn't realize we were lighting her fire. Others nodded quietly. They had underestimated not just her discipline, but her ability to shift the battlefield without ever changing her tone. In committee rooms, her name came up in strange places, slipped into footnotes, echoed in citations, whispered in reluctant praise. A conservative senator, long known for stonewalling progressive legislation, leaned over to a colleague and said, Crockett doesn't waste words. That's why she scares them. It wasn't admiration, not quite. But it wasn't dismissal either. It was the kind of respect reserved for opponents too sharp to be underestimated. As Jasmine continued her work writing policy, listening to communities showing up where cameras didn't, her presence became harder to ignore. She wasn't a disruptor anymore. She was an architect. And while the headlines drifted elsewhere, her impact burrowed deeper. They tried to erase her by pretending she wasn't there. But the silence they chose only proved what the public had already begun to believe. You don't silence a storm by looking away. You just stop seeing how fast it's already changing the ground beneath your feet. The cameras were gone. The lights were off. And for the first time in weeks, Jasmine Crockett stood barefoot in her kitchen, holding a chipped mug of lukewarm tea she'd forgotten to drink. Outside, the city still buzzed, but inside her small Dallas home, the silence was different, thicker, heavier. It wasn't the calm of control. It was the stillness of carrying something too long without setting it down. Stacks of handwritten letters covered her dining table, children thanking her for being brave, elders calling her a reflection of the fight they thought had been lost. But beside them sat the unopened envelopes, legal threats, press demands, a pink envelope from an estranged friend she hadn't had the strength to read. She ran her hand across the table, edge eyes fixed on nothing, heart caught somewhere between pride and fatigue. In the next room, her father was watching an old documentary about the civil rights movement. His voice cut through the air softly, as if talking to himself. Your mama would have been proud and worried sick. Jasmine smiled at the floor. That was the truth. Her mother's strength had always come wrapped in warnings. They will come for you when you stop flinching, and it will hurt. Speak anyway. Jasmine had written those words once in the back of a legal pad. Tonight she repeated them like a prayer. She sat on the edge of her bed, the weight of expectation finally unclenching, just enough to reveal what had been hiding beneath it: grief. Grief for what she'd lost. Time, friendships, safety, and something deeper, the version of herself that once believed truth alone would be enough. Her eyes welled not from fear, but from exhaustion. She had stood against giants. She had not fallen, but she had not left the fight untouched. A text buzzed. Another invitation. Another demand. She turned the phone face down and laid back, staring at the ceiling. Her breath slowed. Her pulse calmed. And for the first time in a long while, she let herself wonder not what came next, but what it had all cost. Because beneath the applause, the strategy, the symbolism, she was still one woman, one voice, one truth. And the question that haunted her most was the one no one dared to ask aloud. What's the cost of speaking truth when nothing is guaranteed? The noise had come and gone like a hurricane, violent, fast, unforgettable. But now in the quiet of her office, with only the hum of a desk lamp and the soft rattle of wind against the windows, Jasmine finally had space to breathe. The town hall, the smear campaigns, the silence that followed it all played back, not as headlines, but as moments frozen in time. Not loud, not chaotic, just precise. She thought about the line that changed everything. It hadn't been scripted. It hadn't been strategic. It had been instinct born from years of holding back, of choosing diplomacy over fury, precision over volume. And still it had cracked the mask of power like a stone through glass. What followed wasn't about the truth she spoke, but the way she carried it, without shouting, without bending. Support had come in waves, but so had expectation. Some wanted her to finish the takedown. Others wanted her to retreat, but she had done neither. Instead, she had stood calm, still unflinching, while the storm raged around her. And in that stillness, she found something no microphone could amplify: control. Now, as the sky outside shifted from black to gray, Jasmine stared out across the sleeping city. Her reflection stared back, older, wiser, not defeated, but sharpened. The truth hadn't changed, but she had. Not louder, just clearer. And in that final moment before the sun rose, Jasmine asked herself the question no one else could answer. What does dignity look like? When the world demands a spectacle, the plaza was packed shoulder to shoulder. Students, elders, nurses in scrubs, barbers still in aprons, fathers holding daughters on their shoulders. They hadn't come for a rally. They came for clarity. The sun dipped low behind Jasmine as she stepped up to the podium. No teleprompter, no scripted applause lines, just paper in her hand, breath in her chest, and a city watching. She looked out at the crowd not as a politician, but as someone who had stood at the eye of a storm and refused to break. Then she spoke, voice strong, but measured, rising, not in volume, but in weight. We don't have to yell to be heard. We don't need scandal to spark change. We don't need to tear each other down to lift this country up. A hush fell, not silence, but reverence. Jasmine continued, if truth makes people uncomfortable, good. If dignity is rare, let it rise. If holding the line means standing alone, then so be it, because I will not trade composure for clicks. The crowd erupted not with fury, but with purpose. Hands lifted not in protest, but in promise. From the edges of the crowd to the very front, it was no longer about her. It was about what she'd awakened. And as chants began to swell, low, rhythmic, defiant, Jasmine stepped back from the mic, not triumphant, but steady. Because she hadn't led them into battle. She'd reminded them they already had the power. She had begun as a local voice, one district, one courtroom, one community at a time. Not born from celebrity, not crafted by consultants, but shaped by the long grind of listening, learning, and showing up when no one else would. And yet when the spotlight found her, she didn't flinch. She stood still, held the silence, and let the world feel the weight of her truth. What followed wasn't noise, it was transformation. Jasmine never chased the moment. The moment chased her. She refused to scream in a world addicted to shouting, refused to smear in a system built on spectacle. And in doing so, she became more than a politician. She became a reminder that real power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits, listens, holds the line. Her story wasn't about scandal. It was about endurance, about what happens when courage isn't explosive, but quiet, unshakable, and real. In a time where so many choose performance over purpose, she chose something harder, restraint in the face of chaos, grace in the face of cruelty. And now as her voice echoes far beyond the halls of Congress, another question rises to meet it. What does real leadership look like in today's America? And how many voices like hers are still waiting for their moment to speak? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.